Hey, what was that? What was that Christian theory that you were about to tell? Hey, I don't know the Christian theory. I want to know it.
Okay. Okay.
No. What?
No.
Okay.
Christian theory.
Yeah,
I didn't say
Christian
anything
theory.
yet.
So
About recycling?
yes.
No.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
No.
Another tidbit revealed in the sex tapes was that when Chris mass debates, he makes sure to ejaculate into a plastic cup to avoid making a mess. Shortly after this news broke, talk began to grow that Chris actually drinks from this cup. The initial assumption, given Chris's hard stance on gay people, was that Chris was a devout fundamentalist Christian and therefore had a rigid interpretation of the biblical story of Onan. This was before we found out Chris wouldn't know anything about the Bible unless he heard it on Family Guy. Eventually, the real reason was discovered. Chris believes that by ingesting his own sperm, he can recycle it so that none of his potential children are lost, and so that his semen count, presumably he meant sperm count, remains high.
His brill.
Exactly. As though everyone is born with a finite number of sperm that they eventually run out of if they don't swallow more.
Just like the egg.
Henry Ford believed this. Emmanuel Kant believed this.
Hotep, is this the first time you're hearing this?
I've never heard this.
You're like, what the
I didn't know this.
Circles, so
That's incredible.
You want to hear my theory on Chris Chan?
Oh, wait. Before your theory, I just want to say one more thing, and we are going to go back to Jules' question as well about that word. But one more thing I just want to mention regarding Spaz Kid, please come on our show, is that in his animation, he did like this whole animation about Chris Chan. He had a segment where I think he showed the sperm going through, like cartoony sperm guys going through the stomach and then like being dissolved in stomach acid and like screaming out like, ah! Why did this have to be our fate? They were just dying in the stomach acid.
Newgrounds.
I'm gonna gag.
Okay.
You want to hear my theory?
Yes.
Oh, that's incredible.
Theory, and then Jules' question. Yes, go for it.
Okay. Well, maybe Jules. Nah, that'll take forever. Okay, mine'll take forever. If you follow the Geno Samuel videos on Chris Chan, I leave a number of comments. Some of them have been upvoted. Some of them have gotten heat. But basically, my theory is that Chris is an. Okay, we know that he's probably an autogynophiliac, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Autogynophilia.
What's that?
Define that for the viewers who don't want to Google it and see horrible things.
Do not research. So my theory, it's the sexual typology that's been rejected as transphobic. Although ironically enough, Blanchard's typology is maybe sort of less transphobic, obviously.
Well, it says over here, autogynophilia is defined as a male's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a female.
Yeah, it's a paraphilia, and it explains a certain amount of trans identity. So, and it's labeled as transphobic and pseudoscience. But really, it explains a lot, and if anything, it's made me sort of more sympathetic to a lot of trans people. Ironically, because the trans people, they say that it's incredibly transphobic. Anyways, so my theory is that Chris Chan, the reason he started off as hating homosexuals, and the reason he has to apologize for it now, even though he probably doesn't mean it, but because he's in the trans community, he has to, is I believe that from an early age, Chris Chan has had a very strong, Christina, whatever, has had a very strong repulsion towards anything to do with masculinity. And it is the case that a lot of AGP, to make it short, it is the case that they've had this sort of tension with the gay community, with homosexual men, because in Chris Chan's mind, he views it almost as hyper masculinity to go with another man, and he's always sort of had this reliance on the world of women, and so therefore,
gal pals.
Gal pals.
That's hyper. That's hyper masculine. How does that?
So Chris would be terrified by like the bear float at the Pride Parade.
Yeah, well, exactly, because the reason it's hypermasculine is because a lot of proclivities towards homosexual men, oftentimes they have a sort of aesthetic of being like, the bear, the masculine. And also because women are totally out of the equation, Chris Chan views that as very threatening because of his experience.
An important in his life, because that's what gave him his name too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The bear, yeah, that's right. And so
wait, I don't want to gloss over that. For those who don't know,
the bear is very important in the mythos.
So what happened with the bear?
Canology.
Chris, I don't want to divert it too much, but for those who don't know, explain what was this thing with the bear that caused Chris to have this revelation and change his name.
If you look up documentaries, you'll read about it. You'll see about it. There was a moment where Chris Chan met a bear at a mall, and it basically to sum it up, the bear misunderstood the guy in a mascot bear costume. It wasn't a real bear. He thought that he called him Chris or what was his name actually?
Christian, I'm forgetting. Instead of Christopher, yeah.
So he changed his name because he thought that was a sign from God, because that bear was clearly godlike for
God and the bear.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. Yep.
No bears are going to be in a mall. Come on, that has to be a sign.
Or something. So I'm going to try to find some comments I made, but basically that Christian, he has a very hostile view towards masculinity in a lot of ways. So for example,
I can very much see that.
So for example, in his blog posts, he talks about how basically men have to bind their package with skorts, and he calls it the disgusting growth in between his legs. And so a lot of people who are AGP, this is Blanchard, says that they're very dysphoric towards the actual private parts. And so Christian displays a very acute dysphoria towards his masculine features. And so in my opinion, this is of course because of the extreme bullying he experienced from men his whole life. And so that could possibly be an explanation. But of course, I'll try to find what I said, but this is sort of in line with the analysis of the sort of genealogy of Chris Chan's mental state. Because as you can see in the documentary, he slowly creeps into like trying on his mother's clothes and acting more feminine and wearing.
So now that he's trans, I imagine his preference though is like, I'm a lesbian, that kind of thing.
Yeah, a male lesbian, exactly.
Oh,
so
yeah.
And of course, the way he defines male lesbian is he has a very, I would say, it's actually stunning. I wanted to write something, but I thought it was sort of like goofy. He has a very metaphysical view of gender. He thinks that it's almost similar to the twin-spirited stuff, where he believes there's a male soul and a female soul. By the way, I found the comment. It's a very long comment. So I wrote, now we get into the more compelling portion of Chris's life that reveals so many pathology. This is on part 34 of the Geno Samuel Chris Chan, a comprehensive documentary. So I said there's many pathologies and disorders he truly has. Everything must be mediated through sexual gaze and the pleasure principle, to the point of truly disturbing opinions and behaviors like his idea of sex in relationship class in high school, hooking up or something with teacher supervision. So basically, Chris, through his life, he expressed this wish that sexuality is quite terrifying and destructive to him. And so therefore, basically, you should, like some crazies think of this. This is the real thing. These crazy people in Sweden, these pedagogy professors, they believe that like children should be exposed to active sexuality in school to sort of quote unquote get it over with. He actually said this. And I don't think Chris is a pedophile, but I think that
a pedophoric.
He's pedophoric because to him,
well, Chris obviously like probably delved into pornography and that sort of stuff from a very, very young age. Like that's apparent.
Yeah, and so of course he has this, a lot of autistic people have this sort of lack of development when it comes to high school. He has this very strong attachment to it. And so to him, it's only natural in his mind that he expresses sort of sexual exploration in a quote unquote, like clinical and like mediated, like the teacher's almost like guiding you into a sexual experience. He actually expressed this. And I'm not going to blame him as much as I hate pedophiles and all of that. I think he's not a pedophile. I think that he truly believes that there should be no like sort of intimate separation.
You believe he's trans age. You're saying he's trans age, right?
Well, he is trans now. Trans age.
I don't think he's trans age. I think he literally is like stunted.
He's age fluid. Is that better?
I don't think he expresses it that way, the way that some sickos
He's a
have.
failed male. That's what he is.
Has arrested development, to put it lightly. And I think that Christian, he doesn't believe in sort of a separate, or rather from his trauma, he can't experience a separation between the intimacy of sexuality at a young age and sort of the professional environment of teachers and schools. because he believes that there should be, like, he calls it a relationship class where, like, the teacher pairs you up with a girl and, like, you have this, like, sexual encounter.
Exploration with each other.
I guess that would solve the
That's
incel.
that's
Caitlyn Jenner and
Sounds like a
Christine
porn.
Chan are two versions of the same story. And it's a story about what happens when, like, your environment, like, rips your heart out.
Well, he has this tutorial he showed on his, like, game he developed, or it was like a platform game. So he sort of believes that that, like, if there was a cure for autism, that he would, like, force it on people, and it's like this really weird thing that is very alienating to a lot of people on the spectrum. But basically, because he views
what would a cure for autism even look like? What does that even mean? What is that?
If you go to the part of the episode, he talks about
getting struck by a lightning bolt.
Love and patience.
But this is the thing. Christian says a lot of things. I think that he
nurture shock.
Yeah, he perceives things through a mind that has been fundamentally distorted from his parents and from bullies and so forth.
Well, we shouldn't turn him into a woman. We should, like, make him a eunuch and turn him into, like, a scholar.
Why not jack him up? Why not jack him up?
Well, like,
why not imbue strength? Why the link sheet? What's with the link sheet in your own family?
I would not use the word jack him. I would not use the word jack him up. What does that mean?
I mean,
imbue strength.
Make people strong and tend to.
But anyways,
you build them up. You don't. You build them up. You build them up. You jack them. You build them up. You jack them up.
Coolest sex doll.
He is like a 30-something-year-old man. He's almost stunted as, like, a 14-year-old still LARPing as an 8-year-old. Like, there's nothing you're gonna do in, like, a 2 or 3 month straight.
Haters gonna hate. Haters gonna hate. Jealousy is
bad. Guys, let's reel it in.
Haters are gonna hate. Hey, haters hate, man. Haters be hate.
Anyway, so
I would
the point being is that
drink poison every day.
I think Chris Chan is, in a lot of ways, not to give out too much because I probably will write something about him. Chris Chan is a metaphor, I think, for a lot of issues that are plaguing modernity in terms of him being a living Truman Show, because I noticed this perverse this sort of decoupling and destruction and blurring of the lines between intimacy in terms of sexuality and public utility. Because a lot of people suggest that, well, how do we cure the incel problem? We just have, like, subsidized hookers and GFs. And it's like, to me, that's incredibly destructive, because they're really trying to, and this goes with sexualizing children in schools and Hollywood, because to me it seems that people want to treat sexuality as utility, and this is in violation. And this is if you read the book Smut, I actually did a whole university course.
Hold up one second.
The book is called Smut. I highly recommend reading it. And so it talks about, like, the erogenous zones and entering into the erotic reality and how people view different things. So the traditionalist view, and of course the author is kind of flawed because it's like the sort of, Sartrean existentialism, but essentially people who are more traditionalist view it as sexuality is a way of getting at the self. Literally, it's a way of invading the deepest recesses of subjectivity. And so this is why people have a repulsion towards certain paraphilias and fetishes and acts, because it's a way of reducing one's subjectivity, not just into a fetish, but also breaking the whole organism of the psyche and the self. And so Chris Chan is a good case study, because a lot of people do believe that we should basically treat sexuality as utility from a very young age, and therefore maybe it's okay if teachers, I don't know, fucking
how young are the kids? How young?
Well, this is the problem, right? How young, right? So if you're saying that teachers should be actively involved in quote unquote childhood sexuality, and this is of course an old theory. This comes from Alfred Kinsey and Wilhelm Reich and Sigmund Freud.
My high school English teacher fucked and married a student.
Yeah. So this is another thing too. It's kind of like people are like, well, what's wrong with that? I wish I was that kid, right? And so it's really crazy.
Well, they're married. They are married.
No,
I had sex ed at my school in 5th grade, so I was.
No, but I just find it funny. I find it funny how the same people that sort of demonize male sexuality and say that it's wrong for a 30-year-old male to date a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old are the same people that sort of are very dismissive of the active sexualization of children, which I find fascinating.
Does anybody disagree? Does anybody disagree with -7 or divided by 2 plus 7? Is that an agreed upon rule, or is there a different one?
What do you mean 2 plus 7?
Divided by 2, so you take my age is 20. The lowest I can go is 7. The lowest I can go is 17 because I take 20 divided by 2 for 10. Then I take it to 17. And is there any disagreement with that math?
Well, 20 and 17 is kind of like a gray area, although I would say those years are
okay. Hey, listen. Take any number though. I mean, I think it works 100% of the time. I run the numbers.
Maybe.
I'm 27. I just came up with 20.5.
I don't know because my oldest child's father is almost 10 years older than me, and my youngest child's
father. How old were you when you had the child with your oldest?
I was 22. My oldest, I was 22.
11, 18. So 22 and 18.
But he was he was 30. I'm usually the younger person. He was 30.
So he was 30, which would be 30 divided by 2 plus 7 is 22. 22 is right on the line.
East.
Okay. Well, then that works.
Oh no.
I was wondering.
That's good. It's just when people start to get like really creepy numbers, like a 34-year-old with an 18-year-old. That's kind of like, hey, Blue Shoe, 34 years old, 18.
But people have the same reaction, Gio. People have the same reaction. If you're 25, if you're a 25-year-old with a 70-year-old, like people have the same creepy reaction.
Well,
so
that's just for money
so you would need
you
need to condition against the disgust that you were talking about in the same way. So if you think about like you're protective of disgust and you're like watchful of like don't let the pedophile demon goblins get rid of your disgust.
What?
Just think about well, I think that's kind of where Gio's coming from. Just think about how a 25-year-old, a 70-year-old is frequently disgusting to people, and you will be shamed for it. People get shamed for it, and people make choices based on what your mother's complaining about all the time. Right. And so if people are disgusted by choices you're making and your mother's like, but
if you're dating if you're dating a 75-year-old, there's some kind of money thing involved.
Not necessarily. The thing is not necessarily like you can find examples of these things when like someone has like a weird old person fetish. Like
who's the one that died?
That's the problem with generalizing is like you want to have neat bows on these like moral characteristics.
Jules,
really,
what's the oldest sexual partner you've had?
When I was 23, 28.
Oh, that's
very tight.
That's No, but my point being is that normal. I'm talking more of like a social issue of trying to destroy those barriers between people, and it's really kind of fucked up and creepy.
There is another thing here when it comes to, let's say you are someone who is not dating early on and you want to put more time into a career. I think a fear that some people may have is that a lot of, let's say, girls today are prematurely having so much sex that later on, like, the whole cock carousel thing that they like talking about, the idea being there is that at a certain point later on, they're not going to be as attached. They're not going to be
the same people believe.
We gotta get Sandman the MGTOW
I just love listening to people that are so inexperienced, like talk about like watch out for cooties and like watch out for. It's a real phenomenon. If you have a prize stallion and you're breeding them, and this stallion is just having sex all the time, making new horses, the stallion will stop working, right? It will develop its own erectile dysfunction. But that's also because it's in a blackfish situation where if you look at killer whales in the wild, their dorsal fins never fall down. But if you look at a blackfish in a cage, the dorsal fin just collapses on itself. And that's what happens when you force anything into a procreation bed. Because if you can have an indefinite number of sexual partners and never have erectile dysfunction. In fact, erectile dysfunction, I hate to break it to people, I hate to break everyone's illusion, comes from primarily from like monogamy dynamics.
Well, you're talking about the guys.
Body operates on a user principle.
Is there an
Your
equivalent
body
for women?
operates on a user or loser principle. So there's certain
Are you saying people are naturally polyamorous?
So you think we should be polygamous?
I think that
I don't think
breeding stallions, polyamory. I don't know where this is
I think
going,
before surveillance was everywhere, men were so disgusting that they took for granted that they would have mistresses and then treat their women like property. Okay. And I'm not saying we should be like France, where the prime minister has a national mistress. I'm just saying people should not willfully engage in double standards and should feel love and happiness from their partner's love and happiness. And you should do things that work.
There was an interesting thread I remember reading recently where someone was talking about how, let's say, in the 1980s, the relationships that they had with women back then was that a lot of the women, like especially like, you know, like the younger women, there was more of an innocence about their approach to sex. Like when they first started dating, they didn't even, have intercourse yet. It was just like, fondling and breast licking and stuff like that. And the idea there was that today, in comparison, a lot of the younger women, in that thread at least, that's what the guy wrote, that they are very, very confident. And you probably really like that, Jules. Like, that they are these confident alpha women who already know everything there is to know, and there's no question about what's going to happen. But the question is like, when it comes...
Not necessarily. I dated a girl who was so inexperienced. She had one sexual partner before me. She, like, couldn't do anything. And she barely spoke English. No, I was just like, let's read about this. There's a book. I'll share it in the chat. It's called Below Him. Okay?
I have to disavow.
And she could have married a base job man, but then you ruined her, Jules.
After the book, she just became more confident because it's pleasurable to pleasure people. It feels good to make people happy. People, like,
in the confines of marriage, yes.
In the confines of marriage. Okay? Yes. So it's not about, like, being a slut and, like, being, like, it's just sort of like,
no, Jules, it's not so much that as I think most people are, and I don't mean to look down on most people, but I think most people are more in this NPC mode of being puppets for whatever advertisements they absorb on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that is like, the self-confidence is not so much of a self-confidence.
But the advertising comes from your traditions too. It's not just like people like studying things and going, oh my God, Eureka. Like, this is how things are. It's also people going like, what's the most Lindy book I can find? Like, they were doing this 500 years ago.
Nobody's talking about books at all, though. If we're talking about
advertising is advertising.
If we're talking about regular
people,
about
cultural,
they're just eating of the trough.
Cultural influence is cultural
they're
influence.
just eating of the trough of modern cultural influence. So of course they're going to come out as being very self-confident and knowing everything there is to know about sex. But I'm not sure how loyal they would be able to be in the long term, and I think that's an issue many people are having today when it comes to having a long-term relationship. And
exactly.
If you're worried about loyalty, just focus on being loyal yourself, because that's the only thing.
Didn't you say people are naturally polyamorous?
I'm just like, if you don't trust other people, it's usually a sign that you're not trustworthy. I think if you're worried about loyalty, just focus on being loyal yourself.
The chat,
or you've been burned from over-trusting someone you shouldn't have.
I've been burned so many times and just philosophically refuse to let it jade me or become a cynic, because I think I would be miserable.
The chat said, imagine your mom rode the carousel so much that she doesn't have any pair bonding hormones left. That's the problem. You don't want something like that to happen. That's what we're trying to prevent.
Here,
let me read again. This comment from Buff in the chat says, imagine your mom rode the carousel so much that she doesn't have any pair bonding hormones left. And
that's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, that actually.
Dude, that just comes from being hurt.
I grew up on an army base, and I can say
from the hurt. It's not so much.
So you're saying that the pair bonding hormones do not exist?
I'm saying that what you think is an incentive model with like a 1 and a 0 is a much more dynamic, multi-faceted
nature is ones and zeros,
system.
like at every level.
it's a much more dynamic, multifaceted system. And if you nudge it different ways on all sides, you will get different reactions, right?
I think family
it's much more like a musical instrument than it is a switch.
I think family plays a huge role in this, though. So if there is, let's say, a girl who has a really positive influence from her family, I think that's going to resonate in the kind of people she's going to be able to find and the kind of decisions she's going to make early on based on those family influences. Most people are lazy. They're not going to put in the time. They're eating off the same trough as their daughters are.
It's also about how good you are at making someone feel good. If you're not good at making people feel good, it doesn't matter like what their background is. They'll betray you, fuck you over, and leave. You're basically saying
that everybody should turn into Captain Save-A-Ho.
Lev, what are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that I think
King Simp.
Man up and marry them, bros.
People should go get mail order brides. They should go get virgin.
What?
Amish people. They should date experienced strippers. They should do whatever they want. Okay.
Not everybody
There's
can do
no one size fits all. There's no the best.
No, there is.
There is.
Jules, if there was
only one thing.
Jules.
It is to follow what is given to us by God and God alone.
Okay, look at voting blocks. How come people rally around in certain like red districts and blue districts? People do follow certain patterns, and those patterns are influenced by certain things that are going on in their environment, by what's going on in academia. My point here, Jules, is that, like I said before, not everybody has a grade of an advisor as you to guide them along such a way that they can have a positive influence on people.
I doubt I'm that good an advisor.
Yes,
more
you are.
And more.
My point is,
no.
How public have you been about your advisor, Jules?
Well, that's one of the Patreon perks as well. $20 patrons, they're gonna get Jules as their relationship advisor.
One-on-one.
Exactly. So go to patreon.com/
very bespoke.
break the rules.
I'm a listener. I'm a listener.
Jules is a great fucking listener.
Like, subscribe, review, give $1 million because you know you got it. You got that fuck you money. No, got that fuck me money.
Fuck me money.
Rate the video 5 stars, guys.
Exactly.
Rate the video 5 stars.
So going back to what I was talking about, my only point here, Jules, is that while I agree that it would be best if people were to utilize the kind of things you're talking about, it would help to have a better society. I agree with you. My only point is that most people are not going to be able to get that advice, and most people are just dealing with the chips that they're given. And the chips that they're given is not, at least the consensus seems to be, like we had a comment from De Facto earlier, literally no one is faithful anymore. So if that's the environment that we're given, I'm sorry, man, but there are not enough Juleses in the world to heal that. And
wow, is that an accurate statement?
I'm a faithful motherfucker.
You're all left.
Is that an accurate statement, though? Hold on.
Someone's saying I'm not faithful. I'll kick them in the mouth.
Fuck you. Who's talking about me?
Bubbles.
All Jules's.
Bubbles is Jules's cat, by the way, because Blue Shoe, you asked who is Bubbles. That's Jules's beautiful cat.
Look at this, paying $20 just to gaslight Jules into psychosis. Amazing.